cotton undershirt. Keeps the wool off your skin, one explains. Then a heavy wool shirt, followed by a wool vest. Some men add a second wool shirt before putting on their mackinaw coat. Pants are similarly layered, long underwear, then heavy wool trousers. Cotton kills, Gustafson tells you bluntly. Gets wet, stays wet, pulls heat from your body. Only use it as that first layer. Everything else is wool. Wool keeps you warm even when wet. Hands and feet get special attention. Most men wear 2 pairs of socks, a thin cotton pair underneath thick wool ones. Boots are greased regularly with a mixture of beeswax and tallow to keep them water-resistant. Hands get the same treatment, thin cotton gloves covered by heavy mittens. Why mittens instead of gloves, you ask Gustafson. Fingers keep each other warm in mittens, he replies. Simple math. More skin touching skin. More heat stays where you need it. Headwear is equally crucial. Wool caps pulled low, often with ear flaps that can be tied down in the worst weather. Some men wrap woolen scarves around their lower faces to warm the air before it hits their lungs. Breathe through your nose when it's really cold, advises another veteran. Mouth breathing in 40 below will freeze your lungs. Bad way to go. The amount of knowledge these men possess about cold survival is staggering. Every piece of their clothing, every habit they've formed, is the result of generations of hard-won experience, often paid for in frostbitten fingers and toes, or worse. That evening, as the temperature continues to drop, you get a lesson in another crucial survival skill: drying wet clothes. After a day in the woods, everyone returns with at least some damp clothing, whether from sweat or snow. Wet clothes are not just uncomfortable, they're potentially deadly in this environment. Above the stove runs a network of wires and ropes, creating a makeshift drying rack. Men hang their damp socks, mittens, and long underwear from these lines, creating what looks like a strange forest of dangling fabric. The air fills with steam and the distinctive smell of drying wool, a smell that becomes as much a part of bunkhouse life as wood smoke. Don't put 'em too close to the stovepipe, warns Danny as you hang your socks. Catch fire if they touch it when it's really going. Saw a whole bunkhouse burn down that way once. The drying area operates by an unspoken system of rotation. Those whose clothes are dry make room for those whose aren't. There's no arguing, no selfishness. Everyone understands the stakes. Your feet are the most important, Schmidt tells you as you hang your damp socks. Can lose fingers and still work. Lose toes, and you're heading south on the next supply sleigh. This focus on feet extends to bunkhouse routine. Each night, many men perform a ritual that at first seems strange to you. They thoroughly dry their feet by the stove, then carefully inspect each toe for signs of frostbite or trench foot. White or grey spots mean frostbite setting in, Isaacson explains, demonstrating the inspection on his own massive feet. Catch it early, you can save the toe. Wait too long. He makes a chopping motion with his hand. The treatment for mild frostbite is counterintuitive. Never rub it or use hot water, warns Gustafson. Lukewarm water only, gentle. Too much heat too fast will destroy the tissue. For prevention, many men rub their feet with bear grease or other animal fats before putting on fresh, dry socks for the night. The grease creates a moisture barrier and helps prevent chafing. Smells awful, admits a logger named Murphy, as he applies the thick yellowish substance to his feet. But better than losing toes. As November deepens, bringing longer nights and more intense cold, the bunkhouse itself requires constant maintenance to remain an effective shelter. The chinking between logs contracts in extreme cold, sometimes creating gaps that let in bitter draughts. "Gotta check the chinking weekly," Mackenzie announces one Sunday, the only day without regular logging work. "Any man finds a draft near his bunk, report it. We'll fix it today." The repair process is simple but effective. More moss is stuffed into any gaps that have appeared, and a fresh layer of clay mortar applied. In the coldest sections of the bunkhouse, particularly the north wall, a layer of pine pitch is added over the chinking for extra protection. "Sticky mess," comments Schmidt as he helps apply the pitch with a wooden paddle. But wind hits this wall hardest. Extra protection's worth the trouble. The roof receives similar attention. Snow has begun to accumulate, and while its weight helps compress the sod layer and increase insulation, too much snow can stress the structure. 8 men on roof duty, Mackenzie orders. Clear off half the snow, leave enough for insulation. Careful around the stovepipe, that area's clear for a reason. You volunteer for roof duty, curious about this aspect of bunkhouse maintenance. Climbing a rough ladder to the gabled roof, you find yourself standing on what looks like a small snow-covered hill. The sod layer beneath the snow is frozen solid, creating a surprisingly stable surface. Under Gustafson's direction, your team carefully removes excess snow with wooden shovels, being sure to maintain an even distribution and avoid creating low spots where meltwater might pool. Around the stovepipe, all snow is cleared completely in a 3-foot radius to prevent any risk of fire. "Snow's actually great insulation," Gustafson explains as you work. "Like how igloos work. But too much weight can collapse even the strongest roof. Seen it happen." Back inside, you notice other men engaged in various maintenance tasks. Some are repairing bunks that have begun to squeak or sag. Others are checking the floor for drafts, filling gaps between planks where necessary. A few are cleaning the windows, not for appearance, but to remove frost build-up that blocks precious light. The most critical maintenance, though, focuses on the stove and stovepipe. A build-up of creosote in the pipe can not only reduce efficiency, but also create a serious fire hazard. Every few weeks the pipe must be cleaned. This is a complex operation requiring perfect coordination. First, the fire is allowed to burn down to coals. Then, sections of the stovepipe are carefully removed one by one and cleaned with a specialized brush. The black sooty creosote that comes out is disposed of far from the bunkhouse. Throughout the cleaning, the building rapidly cools, so the work must be done as quickly as possible. "Fastest pipe cleaning I ever saw was 12 minutes flat," Danny tells you proudly as he oversees the operation. "That's our target. Every minute longer is heat lost." Your crew manages it in 14 minutes. Not record-breaking, but efficient enough that the temperature in the bunkhouse drops only marginally before the roaring fire begins to heat things up again. Beyond these physical aspects of survival, you soon learn there are social elements just as important. The isolation and close quarters of bunkhouse life create a unique culture with unwritten but rigid rules. "See that bench running along the wall?" Schmidt asks one evening, pointing to the long wooden seat that extends the length of the room in front of the bunks. "That's the deacon seat, most important piece of furniture after the stove." The deacon seat, you learn, is the social centre of the bunkhouse. In the evenings, after supper, men gather here to talk, mend clothes, repair tools, play cards, or simply rest. There's an unspoken hierarchy to who sits where. The veterans claim the prime spots closest to the stove, while newcomers take what's left. "Why is it called a deacon seat, you ask?" Schmidt shrugs. "Story goes it's because men sit there proper-like, hands folded, listening to stories, like deacons in church. Probably bull, but that's what they say. Whatever its origin, the deacon seat is where much of the knowledge transfer happens in a logging camp. Veterans share stories that contain vital survival information, all wrapped up in tall tales and good-natured ribbing. "Remember Jensen, winter of '85?" an old-timer asks one night, addressing the group at large. Nods all around from the veterans. "Got his Mackinaw wet crossing Miller's Creek. Temperature dropped that night. Coat froze solid. Too proud to ask for help drying it. Next morning found him curled up like a baby, frozen stiff as his coat." The old-timer shakes his head. "Pride'll kill you faster than the cold sometimes." Message received. Swallow your pride and ask for help when you need it. In these conditions, stubbornness can be fatal. The bunkhouse has other unwritten rules. Each man's bunk is his castle, the only private space in an otherwise communal life. You never touch another man's belongings or sit on his bunk without invitation. Personal hygiene, limited as it is, becomes a moral imperative. While no one expects cleanliness by city standards, a man who doesn't make some effort to keep himself and his area reasonably clean quickly becomes an outcast. "Johnson, you're ripe as week-old fish," announces a burly logger one evening, addressing a slovenly man whose bunk is becoming notorious for its smell. "Either wash them socks or sleep in the stable with the oxen." The ultimatum is delivered with humour, but the message is dead serious. In close quarters, basic standards must be maintained. Johnson grumbles but complies, washing his socks in a bucket of lukewarm water by the stove. Noise is another sensitive issue. With men sleeping at all hours, some just off shift, others just about to start, respect for others' sleep is essential. Loud talking, singing, or horseplay is confined to certain hours and areas of the bunkhouse. 7 to 9, evenings, that's social time, Schmidt explains. Otherwise keep it down. Man who wakes up the wrong crew might find his boots mysteriously frozen solid overnight. Even the stove area has its own etiquette. Since it's the most precious resource in the bunkhouse, access is carefully managed. Men whose clothes are truly wet get priority at the drying lines. No one monopolizes the warmth. You warm up, then move aside to let others have their turn. One evening, as a howling blizzard shakes the bunkhouse walls, you join a group on the deacon seat listening to Isaacson, the Finnish logger, explain the concept of sisu. Not just courage, he says, his accent thickening as he searches for the right words, is grit, determination. When everything says stop, you continue. In Finland, we say man with sisu can walk through walls if he must. "We call it pig-headed stubbornness here," jokes Murphy, "but it's the same thing." Laughter ripples through the group, but there's respect in it. Every man here understands that survival in this environment requires that quality, whether called sisu or stubbornness or simply grit. The conversation shifts to various survival techniques from different traditions. The Swedish loggers share their methods for preventing snow blindness, squinting through narrow slits cut in pieces of wood. The French Canadians describe specialized snowshoes they use for deep powder. An Irish logger demonstrates how to predict weather changes by observing subtle shifts in wood smoke patterns. "Sky turns that green-grey colour," adds a veteran from Minnesota. "You drop everything and get back to shelter. Means a blow's coming that'll freeze the balls off a brass monkey." This exchange of knowledge isn't just entertaining, it's vital. Each tip, each technique, represents potentially life-saving information, tested and refined through generations of trial and often deadly error. As you listen, you realize that the true art of survival here isn't just in the physical structure of the bunkhouse, impressive though it is. It's in this accumulated wisdom, passed from veteran to greenhorn, adapted to specific conditions, and embedded in the culture of the logging camp. The bunkhouse itself, with its carefully notched logs and strategic design, is just the first layer of defense against the deadly cold. The second layer is the practices and techniques of survival, the clothing systems, the fire management, the maintenance routines. But the third and perhaps most important layer is the social structure that ensures this knowledge persists and spreads. Later that night, as the blizzard continues to rage outside, you lie in your bunk listening to the wind. It sounds angry, thwarted, like a predator trying to get at prey just beyond its reach. The bunkhouse creaks and settles, but holds firm. The stove glows red in the darkness, Danny's shadow moving occasionally as he tends the fire. You think about the incredible amount of knowledge and skill embedded in this simple structure, the precisely cut notches, the carefully applied chinking, the strategically designed roof. Each element represents generations of hard-won wisdom about how to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And now you're part of that tradition. Each day you learn more, not just about how to fell trees, but about how to stay alive in conditions that would kill most people within hours, how to layer clothing, how to recognize the early signs of frostbite, how to maintain the crucial barrier between the deadly cold outside and the life-sustaining warmth within. The wind howls louder, finding every tiny imperfection in the bunkhouse walls. But inside, protected by logs and moss and clay, and the accumulated wisdom of countless winters, you remain warm, not comfortable by city standards perhaps, but alive. And in the frozen north woods in the dead of winter, that's victory enough. A vicious cold snap hits in early December. The temperature plummets to 30 below zero, and the wind picks up, driving needle-sharp crystals of snow that can flay exposed skin raw in minutes. The workday is cut short. Even logging companies recognize that some conditions are too dangerous for men to function in. You stumble back to the bunkhouse with the rest of your crew, frost coating your beard and eyebrows, your toes and fingers numb despite multiple layers of protection. The moment you push through the door, it hits you. The wall of heat radiating from the massive cast iron stove in the center of the room. It's glowing red hot, its thick iron sides almost orange in places. The chore boy, Danny, is carefully feeding it split logs, his face shiny with sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. "Sweet Jesus," mutters Murphy as he peels off his frozen outer layers. "What have you got that thing stoked up to, Danny? Might melt the damn thing." Danny grins, his face illuminated by the glow of the firebox as he closes its heavy door. Mackenzie's orders. Says it's gonna drop to 40 below tonight. Better too hot than too cold. This red-hot heart of the bunkhouse deserves a closer look. So many of us think of heating as just a dial on the wall. Back then, this stove literally stood between life and death. The central stove is no ordinary heating appliance. It's a massive iron beast, 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet high, with walls a half-inch thick. The firebox is large enough to swallow logs 3 feet long and a foot in diameter. When fully stoked, it radiates heat with an almost physical presence. You can feel it pressing against your skin from 10 feet away. Cost the company a fortune, Schmidt tells you as you both warm your hands near the stove. Had to bring it in by wagon before the first snow. Weighs near 800 pounds. "Worth every penny," replies Gustafson, hanging his damp socks on the drying lines above. Remember that camp on Blue River that tried to save money with a smaller stove? Found 'em all froze solid come spring? You've become friendly with Danny over the weeks, and after supper that evening, you ask if you can watch him tend the stove for a while. You're curious about the techniques that keep this iron heart beating through the coldest nights. Sure, he says, looking pleased to share his expertise. Not much to see, but plenty to learn. Danny's modest about his role, but everyone in camp knows the truth. The chore boy's job is perhaps the most critical in the entire operation. If the stove goes out in the depths of winter, men die. It's that simple. First rule, Danny explains as he checks the firebox, is never let it go completely out. Ever. Starting a fire from scratch when everything's frozen solid. Nightmare. Keep a coal bed going at all times. He demonstrates how he judges the state of the fire not primarily by the flames, but by the coal bed beneath, the layer of intensely hot embers that provide the steady, consistent heat. The flames may dance dramatically, but it's the coals that do the real work. Second rule, he continues, is know your wood. Different woods burn different ways. He points to the neatly stacked piles of split logs along one wall of the bunkhouse. See how they're sorted? That's sugar maple there. Burns hot and long, low flame but serious heat. That's what I use overnight. Yellow birch there, good steady burn, nice flame. That's daytime fuel. And that stack of split pine, that's for when we need quick heat or a bright light for a bit. Burns fast and flashy but doesn't last. The science of wood is surprisingly complex. Danny can identify a dozen different species by sight, smell and weight, and knows the burning properties of each. This knowledge isn't academic. It's what allows him to maintain the precise heat level needed throughout the changing conditions of day and night. Third rule, Danny says, lowering his voice slightly, is always keep a reserve, no matter what. He shows you a hidden cache of perfectly dried split maple logs stored under his bunk. Enough to get through one full night if the regular supply runs out or gets wet. Nobody touches these except in emergency. Camp rule. The existence of this emergency supply speaks volumes about the critical importance of the stove. In a world where every cubic foot of the bunkhouse is precious space, dedicating room to an emergency wood cache is a significant commitment. Fourth rule is know the weather. Danny nods toward the small oiled paper window, now completely covered with frost on the outside. Colder it gets outside, more wood we burn. Wind makes a difference too, drives cold air through every tiny gap. Night like tonight, I'll go through twice the wood of a calm 10 below night. The mathematical precision with which Danny approaches his job is impressive. He doesn't just randomly add wood to keep things hot. He's constantly calculating, adjusting, compensating for changing conditions both inside and outside the bunkhouse. How do you sleep? You ask him again, still amazed by his schedule. Waking every 2 hours seems, well, impossible. Danny shrugs. Your body adjusts, and honestly, the cold wakes me if I sleep too long. Stove cools down enough I feel it in my sleep. The idea that his body has become so attuned to the stove's heat output that it wakes him when the temperature drops even slightly is remarkable. Danny has essentially become a human thermostat. But the really tricky part, he continues, is banking the fire at night. The banking process, you learn, is critical to maintaining heat through the night, while allowing the chore boy some stretches of sleep. Danny demonstrates his technique with practiced efficiency. First, he lets the fire burn down until there's a deep bed of glowing coals but few active flames. Then he uses a metal rake to push these coals to the back of the firebox. Over these, he carefully places several large pieces of sugar maple, the slow-burning hardwood that provides steady heat. The real trick comes next. Danny scoops fine ash from beneath the stove and gently covers the arrangement with a thin layer, almost like tucking it in with a blanket. Ash insulates, he explains. Lets the wood smoulder real slow without flaming up. Come morning, or when I wake for a check, I just rake away some ash, add a bit of kindling if needed, and give it a few puffs of air. He demonstrates this last part, blowing gently on a section of exposed embers until they glow brighter and small flames begin to lick around the wood. Whole art to it, Danny says with justified pride. Do it right. Fire lives for weeks without ever going fully out. Do it wrong. He trails off, but the implication is clear. As the evening deepens and the temperature continues to drop, you begin to notice how the stove affects the social geography of the bunkhouse. The area immediately surrounding the stove, about a 10-foot radius, is significantly warmer than the rest of the building. This creates concentric zones of comfort and activity. Closest to the stove, it's almost uncomfortably hot. This zone is used primarily for drying clothing and warming up immediately after coming in from outside. No one lingers here except Danny, who seems immune to the intense heat. The next zone, from about 10 to 20 feet from the stove, is comfortably warm. This is where most social activity happens in the evening. Card games, conversation, letter writing, tool repair. The deacon seat mostly falls within this radius. Beyond 20 feet, especially in the corners furthest from the stove, the temperature drops noticeably. These areas are primarily used for sleeping, with men relying on wool blankets and shared body heat to stay warm through the night. Ever notice the old-timers sleep furthest from the stove? Schmidt comments, seeing your observations of the different zones. Learn to sleep cool, you adapt better to everything else. This insight explains Isaacson's earlier offer to trade bunks. The veterans actually prefer the cooler sleeping areas, not out of self-sacrifice, but because they've learned that acclimating to cooler temperatures makes all aspects of winter life more manageable. The stove affects more than just heating zones. It creates its own microclimate within the bunkhouse. The air directly above it rises rapidly, creating convection currents that circulate warmth throughout the building. This circulation isn't perfect, hence the colder corners, but it's surprisingly effective. The rising heat carries moisture with it, steam from drying clothes, breath from 100 men, sweat evaporating from bodies. This moisture condenses on the coldest surfaces, primarily the roof and windows, creating steady drips in some areas and thick frost in others. Gotta watch for drips, Gustafson advises, pointing to dark water stains on a few bunks. Get your bedding wet. You're in for a miserable night. Some men rig little gutters out of birch bark to channel the drops away. The moisture issue highlights another crucial function of the stove beyond heating. It helps manage humidity. Without the constant heat creating circulation, moisture would accumulate more quickly on everything, making clothes and bedding chronically damp, a potentially lethal situation in winter conditions. Around 8 o'clock there's an unexpected commotion. The door bursts open, admitting a blast of frigid air and 2 loggers half carrying a third between them. The man's face is alarmingly white, with grey-white patches on his cheeks and nose. Frostbite, announces one of the men helping him. Found him disoriented about a quarter-mile from camp. Must have gotten lost heading back from the North Cut. The injured man is Ellis, a quiet Canadian who keeps to himself. Now he's shivering violently, his speech slurred, his movements uncoordinated, clear signs of hypothermia beyond just the frostbite on his face. "Get him to the stove, slowly," orders Mackenzie, who materializes from his small private room at one end of the bunkhouse. "Don't rush it." The men help Ellis to a bench positioned a careful distance from the stove, close enough to benefit from the heat, but not so close as to warm him too quickly. Someone brings a blanket, which is wrapped around his shoulders. "Danny, water," Mackenzie says. "Lukewarm, not hot." "And someone fetch snow, clean snow." The older logger's directives are followed without question. Danny heats water to a precise temperature. "Blood heat, no hotter," he murmurs, testing it with a finger. Someone else returns with a basin of fresh snow. What happens next is a master class in treating cold injuries, knowledge that has been refined through generations of Northwood's experience. Mackenzie gently applies lukewarm water to Ellis's hands and ears, areas with frostbite that aren't as severe. For the more seriously frozen tissue on his cheeks and nose, he uses something unexpected: snow. "Don't rub," he instructs as he demonstrates, very gently pressing clean snow against the grey-white patches. "Just contact." Draws the frost out slowly. The treatment seems counterintuitive, using snow to treat freezing, but you can see it working as circulation gradually returns to the affected areas. The worst outcome would be for the tissue to thaw too quickly, causing cellular damage that could lead to gangrene. Ellis remains by the stove through the night, his condition slowly improving under Mackenzie's watchful eye. By morning, the immediate danger has passed, though the frostbitten areas now look red and blistered. "He'll keep his nose and most of his cheeks," Mackenzie pronounces. "Might lose a bit of the left earlobe. Lucky we found him when we did." The incident is a stark reminder of how quickly the winter environment can turn lethal, even for experienced woodsmen. It also underscores the life-saving importance of the bunkhouse and its stove. Without this refuge and its carefully maintained heat, Ellis would almost certainly have died. The stovepipe, you notice, is almost as important as the stove itself. Made from sheet iron and 8 inches in diameter, it runs the full length of the bunkhouse before exiting through the roof. This long run is intentional. It extracts maximum heat from the exhaust gases before they escape outside. "Clever design," comments Schmidt when he sees you examining it. "Stovepipes like having a second heater running the length of the building. Finns call it a heat grabber, same idea as their masonry heaters back home." The pipe radiates heat along its entire length, helping to distribute warmth more evenly throughout the bunkhouse. Without this extended run, the areas furthest from the stove would be significantly colder, perhaps dangerously so in the worst weather. This efficient design doesn't come without risks, however. The long pipe accumulates creosote, a flammable build-up of tar and soot, more quickly than a shorter one would. This necessitates the regular cleaning you participated in earlier, a process that becomes even more critical as winter deepens and the stove runs hotter for longer periods. "Chimney fire in a place like this," Gustafsson says with a grim shake of his head. "Death trap. Whole place would go up in minutes." Fire is the dark twin to cold, the other lethal threat that constantly looms over the bunkhouse. The very stove that keeps the cold at bay brings with it the risk of catastrophic fire, especially in a wooden building filled with highly flammable materials. This explains the almost religious care with which Danny and others maintain the stove and pipe. As the night progresses, you observe another ritual centered around the stove, the rotation of sleeping positions. Men whose bunks are furthest from the heat source occasionally get up, warm themselves by the stove for a few minutes, then return to their bunks. This cycle continues through the night, with men instinctively taking turns so the area around the stove doesn't become overcrowded. "Old camp trick," whispers Schmidt when he notices you watching. "Sleep an hour, warm up 5 minutes, sleep another hour. Keeps the blood flowing." By midnight, the bunkhouse has settled into its nighttime rhythm. The stove glows steadily in the centre, Danny's careful banking having created a stable heat output that will last for hours with minimal attention. Most men are in their bunks, huddled under wool blankets. A few night owls remain on the deacon seat, speaking in hushed tones or working on small projects by the light of the stove's glow. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. The logs of the bunkhouse contract in the extreme cold, creating occasional sharp, cracking sounds like gunshots. The wind moans around the eaves, searching for ways in, but inside, wrapped in layers of wool and warmed by the steady radiation of the stove, life continues. You drift into a light sleep, only to be awakened some time later by movement nearby. It's Danny, moving quietly through the bunkhouse to check the stove. You check your pocket watch. 2:15 a.m., right on schedule. You watch through half-closed eyes as he rakes away some ash, exposes glowing coals beneath, and adds 2 precisely selected pieces of maple. His movements are economical, practiced, almost ritualistic. Within minutes, the stove is radiating renewed heat, and Danny returns to his bunk for another 2 hours of sleep. This cycle will repeat itself throughout the night, with Danny waking like clockwork every 2 hours to tend the fire. His dedication is remarkable, especially considering he's the youngest member of the crew. His vigilance is the thread upon which all your lives hang during these frigid winter nights. Morning comes with brutal swiftness. The cook's triangle sounds at 4:30 a.m., rousing men from warm bunks into the relative chill of the bunkhouse. Even with the stove burning steadily, the temperature has dropped during the night, especially in the farthest corners. Danny is already up, having transformed the carefully banked overnight fire into a roaring blaze that fills the stove with dancing flames. Men gather around it, warming themselves before beginning the process of dressing for the day ahead. The morning routine revolves around the stove as much as the evening one did. Men take turns warming boots before putting them on. Cold leather is stiff and uncomfortable. Layers of clothing are warmed briefly before being donned. Some men heat their axes near the stove, making the metal easier to sharpen with files before the day's work. 42 below last night, announces Mackenzie, returning from a check of the outdoor thermometer. Might not work the north cut today, too exposed to the wind. There's no grumbling at this news. Every man knows that working in such extreme temperatures isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Even breathing can become hazardous, as the intensely cold air can damage lung tissue if inhaled directly through the mouth. Breakfast in the cookhouse provides a welcome respite. The cooking stoves have been blazing since 3:30 a.m., making the building almost tropically warm compared to the bunkhouse. Men linger over their food, reluctant to head out into what promises to be a brutally cold day. Eventually, though, work calls. The logging company has contracts to fulfill, and unless conditions are truly life-threatening, the cutting, limbing and skidding of trees must continue. Men bundle up in multiple layers, covering every inch of skin possible, and head out to face the frozen world. You're assigned to work with Schmidt and 2 others in a relatively sheltered area, cutting smaller spruce for railroad ties rather than the massive white pines used for lumber. It's still bitter cold, but the dense stand of trees provides some protection from the worst of the wind. Keep moving, Schmidt advises as you take up your position with a cross-cut saw. Stop moving, you start freezing. Simple as that. The work is hard enough that it generates significant body heat, keeping you relatively comfortable despite the frigid air. Still, any pause in activity is immediately noticeable. Within seconds, the cold begins to seep through your layers of wool, reminding you of its constant presence. By midday, clouds have moved in, bringing with them a new threat: snow. Not the light, powdery snow of extreme cold, but heavier flakes that suggest the temperature has actually risen slightly. Blizzard coming, predicts Gustafsson, glancing at the darkening sky. Might be a bad one. Snow this heavy with temperature this low. Not good. Mackenzie makes the call around 2 in the afternoon. All crews to return to camp immediately. The snow is falling harder now, reducing visibility to less than 100 yards. Wind is picking up too, driving the snow horizontally and creating the first hints of drifts. The return to camp is tense, with crews staying close together to avoid anyone getting separated and lost. By the time you reach the clearing where the buildings huddle against the elements, the blizzard is in full force. The bunkhouse is barely visible through the curtain of white despite being only 50 yards away. Inside, Danny has the stove roaring. He's been preparing for the early return of the crews, building up the fire to its maximum safe output. The heat hits you like a physical force as you enter, a welcome assault after hours in the numbing cold. Gonna be a bad one, Mackenzie announces to the assembled men once everyone is accounted for. Might last 2-3 days according to the barometer. We'll ride it out here. No one leaves the buildings without my say-so. A blizzard lockdown is serious business. It means the camp is effectively cut off from the outside world until conditions improve. If anyone were injured or became seriously ill during this time, there would be no way to get them out to medical help. The central role of the stove becomes even more apparent as the blizzard intensifies through the afternoon and evening. Men cluster around it, warming themselves after the day's work and drying clothes soaked not by melted snow, it's too cold for that, but by sweat that froze within the layers. Keep the clothes moving, Danny instructs, managing the drying area with the authority of someone much older. Dry to the outside, wet to the inside. Everyone gets a turn. The stove affects more than physical comfort. It shapes the social atmosphere as well. As the howling wind makes the outside world seem increasingly hostile, the warm circle around the stove becomes a place of camaraderie and storytelling. Reminds me of the winter of '79, says an old-timer named Johansson. Blizzard so bad we couldn't see the cookhouse from the bunkhouse door. Had to string ropes between buildings so men wouldn't get lost going to meals. This prompts other veterans to share their own blizzard stories. Tales of men lost just feet from safety, of snow piled to the eaves, of winds strong enough to topple trees. Some of the stories may be embellished, but their core message is deadly serious. Respect the power of winter. As night falls, the blizzard's fury increases. Wind shrieks around the bunkhouse, finding every tiny imperfection in the chinking between logs. Snow piles against the walls and drifts over the lower portions of the windows, gradually cutting off what little natural light remains. But inside, illuminated by the red glow of the stove and a few carefully placed lanterns, life continues. Card games form on the deacon seat. A few men write letters home by lantern light. Others repair tools or mend clothing. The Finnish contingent breaks out a harmonica and begins a low, melancholy tune that somehow perfectly matches the storm's howling. Through it all, The stove stands as the literal and figurative heart of the bunkhouse. Its steady heat keeps the deadly cold at bay. Its light provides a focal point in the growing darkness. Its need for regular tending gives structure to the hours of confinement. As you prepare for sleep that night, with the blizzard still raging outside, you reflect on how completely your existence has come to revolve around this single cast iron object. In the city, heat is an assumption, an afterthought. Here, it's the central preoccupation of every day. The stove isn't just a convenience or a comfort. It's the difference between life and death. Its steady heart, maintained by Danny's vigilant care, will beat through the night, keeping 100 men alive in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in hours. Outside, the temperature has dropped again, and the wind drives snow through any gap it can find. Inside, men sleep in rough bunks, wrapped in wool blankets, their breath forming small clouds in the cooler air away from the stove. And at the centre of it all, the iron heart glows red in the darkness, holding the frozen world at bay for another night. The blizzard rages for 2 full days, keeping everyone confined to the camp buildings. When it finally breaks on the 3rd morning, a new world emerges, one transformed by snow. Drifts tower against the bunkhouse, some reaching nearly to the eaves. The path to the cookhouse has completely disappeared, requiring a team with shovels to re-establish the route between buildings. 3 feet of new snow, announces Mackenzie after surveying the camp. Maybe 4 in places. Gonna make for some interesting work. That's an understatement. Deep snow fundamentally changes every aspect of logging operations. Moving through the forest becomes an exhausting slog. Felled trees disappear into snowdrifts, requiring extra work to locate and extract them. Tools get lost in the white expanse, sometimes not to be found until spring thaw. But the logging industry waits for no man, and certainly not for weather. The day after the blizzard, normal operations resume, though with adjustments for the challenging conditions. All right, listen up, Mackenzie announces at breakfast. Snow's too deep for normal work in some sections. Schmidt's crew will break trails first. Isaacson's team will focus on clearing snow from logs already down before the storm. Rest of you, regular cutting but in areas closest to existing trails. The cook bangs his triangle at 4:30 a.m. like always, jolting you from sleep. After 3 months in camp, you've developed something of a routine, though you wouldn't call it comfortable yet. First priority upon waking, check your boots. You keep them under your bunk overnight to prevent them from freezing. Still, they're cold and stiff as you pull them on over 2 pairs of socks. Thin cotton inner, thick wool outer. Next comes the multiple layers of clothing. Long underwear, wool pants, undershirt, wool shirt, wool vest, and finally the heavy Mackinaw coat you'll carry until you're outside. Dressing is a deliberate process. Rush it, forget a layer, and you might pay with frostbite. You're getting faster, comments Schmidt, who's already fully dressed and rolling a cigarette with his thick fingers. Only took you 10 minutes today. You grunt in response, still not fully awake. The bunkhouse is dimly lit by a few lanterns and the red glow of the stove. Men move around in the half-light. A choreography of dressing and preparation that's become almost instinctual after months together. Outside, the world is still pitch black. The stars blaze overhead with an intensity you never saw in the city, their cold light reflecting off the snow to create an ethereal landscape of deep blue shadows and silver highlights. The cookhouse windows glow yellow in the darkness, a beacon guiding the half-awake men across the packed snowpath. Inside, the heat is immediate and welcome. The long tables are already set with tin plates and cups, and the air is thick with the smell of frying salt pork and coffee. "Special treat today, boys," announces the cook as you find your regular spot at the table. "Flapjacks with real maple syrup. Company sent it up with the last supply sled." This news generates more excitement than you might expect. In a world where the menu rarely varies, even small changes become significant events. The maple syrup, a luxury in the Northwoods winter, is a topic of animated conversation as men fill their plates. A typical breakfast is enormous by city standards. A stack of 8 to 12 pancakes, half a pound of salt pork, and several cups of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. You've learned to eat it all, knowing that the calories are necessary fuel for the day ahead. "Wonder where we'll be cutting today," muses a logger named Peterson between mouthfuls of pancake. "Hope it's not that section up on the ridge. Wind'll be brutal up there after the storm." Mackenzie, who always eats quickly at the head table, stands to address the crew as most are finishing their meals. He lays out the day's assignments with military precision, naming crew leaders, cutting areas, and specific objectives. There's a system to his planning. Crews rotate through different cutting areas and different types of work to prevent exhaustion and maintain efficiency. "Schmidt, take your crew, including the greenhorn here, to Section 8, he says, nodding toward you. "Good white pine there and relatively sheltered from the wind. Expect 3 logs per man minimum today." By 5:30 a.m., breakfast is over, and men begin heading to the tool shed to collect their equipment for the day. The sky is still dark, though a faint lightening on the eastern horizon suggests dawn isn't far off. The tool shed is a sacred place in its own way. Axes, saws, cant hooks and peavies hang in precise arrangements on the walls. Each man has his assigned tools, many of which they've personally modified for balance and comfort over years of use. "New edge on your axe yesterday," the tool maintenance man tells you as he hands over your equipment. "Should hold better in this cold." The axe head gleams in the lantern light, its cutting edge honed to razor sharpness. A dull axe is worse than useless in the woods. It's dangerous, requiring more force and increasing the risk of glancing blows. Your crew assembles near the edge of camp. Schmidt checks that everyone has the necessary equipment, then leads the way into the forest. Walking through deep snow requires a specific technique that you've gradually mastered over the winter, a high-stepping motion that's exhausting but effective. "Break trail in shifts," Schmidt orders. 2 men up front for 15 minutes, then rotate back. Save strength. The men at the front have the hardest job, ploughing through untouched snow to create a path for those behind. It's brutal work, especially in drifts that reach mid-thigh. By the time your turn at the front comes, dawn has broken, revealing a forest transformed into a crystalline wonderland by the storm. Reach the historian who told me these guys burned 6,000 calories a day. For context, Olympic swimmers like Michael Phelps eat about 8,000 during intense training. Just walking through that snow was like running a marathon. And then they had to cut down trees all day. Every surface bears a thick blanket of snow. The pines are especially beautiful, their branches bending under white loads that occasionally release in small avalanches when disturbed by wind or a passing squirrel. In other circumstances, you might appreciate the beauty more. Now, with sweat already forming under your layers despite the bitter cold, you're mostly concerned with the practical challenges the snow presents. It takes nearly an hour to reach the designated cutting area, a stand of mature white pines that somehow survived previous logging operations. The trees are magnificent straight trunks rising 120 feet or more, with the first branches starting at least 60 feet up. Each tree represents hundreds of board feet of valuable lumber. "We'll take this one first," Schmidt decides, pointing to a particularly impressive specimen. "Jacobson, you and Murphy on the saw. Rest of us will clear the base." Before a tree can be cut, the snow around its base must be cleared away to allow the sawyers proper access. This is done with wooden shovels and by simply trampling the snow down with snowshoes. It's important work. A sawyer standing in deep, unstable snow is at serious risk when the tree begins to fall. Once the base is clear, the real work begins. Jacobson and Murphy position themselves on opposite sides of the massive trunk with a crosscut saw between them. The saw is a beautiful tool in its own way, 6 feet of tempered steel with precisely shaped teeth designed to cut in both directions. "Watch and learn, Greenhorn," Schmidt tells you. "These two are the best sawyers in camp." The men begin with a smooth, rhythmic motion that belies the enormous effort involved. Pull, push, pull, push. Each stroke removes a small amount of wood, the saw teeth cutting cleanly through the frozen pine. They don't rush, maintaining a steady pace that they can sustain for the time it takes to cut through the 3-foot diameter trunk. "Always start with the face cut," Schmidt explains as you watch. "That V-shaped notch determines which way the tree falls. The direction of fall is critical. Drop a tree in the wrong place, and it might get hung up in the branches of another tree, a dangerous situation that requires additional risky work to resolve. Or worse, it might fall toward the crew, with potentially fatal consequences." While the sawyers work on the face cut, you and the others prepare escape routes, cleared paths leading away from the tree at 45-degree angles from the expected line of fall. When a 120-foot pine comes down, you need to be well clear of both the trunk and the branches, which can snap off and become deadly projectiles. After about 20 minutes of steady sawing, the face cut is complete. A neat V-shaped notch on the side of the trunk facing the intended direction of fall. Now comes the back cut, made on the opposite side of the trunk, slightly above the bottom of the face cut. When she starts to go, drop the saw and move, Schmidt advises the sawyers. No tree's worth dying for. The back cut progresses steadily, eating into the trunk from the opposite side. When approximately 2 inches of wood remain between the back cut and the point of the face cut, the tree begins to show signs of movement, a subtle leaning, almost imperceptible at first. "She's going," calls Jacobson. "Timber!" This traditional warning shout alerts everyone in the vicinity that a tree is falling. The sawyers drop their saw and move quickly along the prepared escape routes. The rest of the crew does the same, eyes fixed on the tree as it begins its fall. For a moment the massive pine seems to hesitate, as if reluctant to relinquish its century-old stance. Then gravity takes hold, and the fall accelerates. The crack of separating wood echoes through the forest, followed by the whoosh of the tree displacing air as it plummets. When it strikes the ground, the impact shakes the earth beneath your feet. Snow explodes outward from the point of impact, and branches snap with reports like gunshots. For a moment after the tree comes to rest, there's silence, as if the forest itself is acknowledging the fall of one of its giants. Then work resumes immediately. No time for reflection in a logging operation. There are quotas to meet. "Limbing team, get to it," Schmidt orders. "Bucking team on standby." The limbing process involves removing all branches from the fallen trunk, transforming it from a tree to a log. This is primarily axe work, requiring precision and care to avoid injury. The branches are cut flush with the trunk. leaving a smooth surface that won't snag during transportation. Watch for spring poles, warns an experienced limber as you join him in clearing smaller branches. Snow's bent a lot of these down. Cut wrong, they'll snap up like a whip. Spring poles are branches or smaller trees that have been bent and trapped under the weight of the fallen tree. When cut improperly, they can release with tremendous force, causing serious injuries or even death. Identifying and safely dealing with them is one of many specialized skills required for survival in logging work. Once the limbing is complete, the bucking team takes over. Their job is to cut the trunk into manageable lengths, typically 16 feet for saw logs destined for the lumber mill. This again involves the crosscut saw, with careful measurements to ensure maximum value from the tree. Measure twice, cut once, Schmidt reminds the buckers. Company doesn't pay us to waste good timber. By mid-morning, the first tree has been transformed from a living pine to a series of neatly trimmed logs ready for transport. The process will be repeated dozens of times throughout the day, with different men rotating through the various roles to distribute the physical strain. Lunch is eaten where you work. There's no returning to camp midday. From your pocket you pull the food prepared by the cook before dawn, a thick sandwich of cold roast beef between slices of dense bread wrapped in oil